Hi, everybody. It's time for another edition, yet another edition, golly, of Politics by Jake, the true PB&J. No. Not that usual PB&J, none of that peanut butter and jelly stuff. Nope, it's Politics by Jake, and I am Jake. I'm your host and your commentator and your political reporter. And it's our aim each week to present, sometimes more often than each week, it's our aim each week, my aim, to present a comprehensive viewpoint of matters political, matters historical, and focusing on it from the standpoint of history, not only, but adding history and applying it to the situations that we see in the world today, based on the concept that if we don't understand history, if we don't understand that many of the things that you are seeing have happened before. For example, the infamous MAGA, Make America Great Again, the infamous MAGA. That existed back in the 30s when there was quite a fascist movement, an ad hoc fascist movement in the country. The United States never embraced fascism the way other countries did, but there was an ad hoc movement in the country of fascism, and Charles Lindbergh, the aviator, who gained such notoriety by his nonstop flight from New York to Paris, was the head of this. And in those days, it was called America First. And it was the very same thing. It was full of MAGA. It was full of Make America Great. It was full of Make America First. And it was full of appeasement. And this is something we're against as a ongoing polemic. We are against fascism, we are against Trump, and we are against MAGA. And that is our stand, and that is pretty much irretrievable. We're locked into that. That's our, you've heard me say this, use the expression, that's my story, and I'm sticking with it. And so with that said, let's get into some of this stuff. I note with interest that Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, and he is the third person in line for the presidency. He's third after the vice president. And he's MAGA, and he did real yeoman service these past few days in basically going against his caucus, the MAGA caucus, which feels very betrayed and is very angry and is out to get him. And it remains to be seen whether they will remove him as speaker or not. But he went ahead and he did yeoman service, and he put the aid for Ukraine bill up for a vote, and it passed with a significant amount of votes. Wasn't close at all. But the very next day, almost, he was involved in this attempt, and the ultra-left is also this way. This is what the ultra-left is doing now. It's kind of the ultra-lefts aided by the MAGA caucus to oust the administrations of some of the finest schools in the country. The administration of the University of Pennsylvania was ousted. That school, that was like founded by Benjamin Franklin. You have the president of Harvard. She was ousted. And these are backers of RFK Jr. And the thing to understand here is that the Republican Party, these MAGAs, are running a frontal attack. And they always have, by the way. This is the thing to understand. This didn't blossom out of nowhere like Venus out of the Cytherean foam, as the saying goes. They've always been doing this, a frontal attack against American education on all levels, period. They have always wanted to wreck and ruin and abolish public schools, always. Once again, as I've talked about before, why they want to do this is the same reason why they want Social Security. They want to go after the other things which they call entitlements. They want to go after the Postal Service because there's a huge pot of money there, and they want to privatize everything. Remember what the definition, the fundamental, the baseline definition of fascism is, the 1922 or 1923 Giovanni Gentile definition, arguably able to be called the father of fascism. It is the control of the means of production by business, by corporation, by private interest. It is the privatization of everything, and that includes American education. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was really, in my opinion, the greatest president of the 20th century, He confirmed this in 1936 in a letter to the 75th Congress, and he said this, and listen, it's the very same thing. The first truth, and I'm quoting here, the first truth is that liberty is not safe if the people tolerate the growth of a private power to a point where it becomes stronger than the democratic state itself. And he goes on, that in its essence is fascism. That in its essence is fascism. That is to say, ownership of government by an individual or by a group or by any other controlling power. And the second truth is that the liberty of a democracy is not safe if its business system does not provide employment and produce and distribute goods in such a way as to sustain an acceptable standard of living. So in other words, basically what he's saying here, he's confirming what I've talked about, the fundamental definition of fascism that Gentili stated in 1922. And he's saying that the liberty of democracy is not safe if workers don't make a living wage. And this in itself is something that we'll do a unit or a segment on later, because there's much grist for the mill with regard to that. I know my listeners can confirm. And he's falling right in line, like I say, with the Giovanni Gentili definition of 1922. And that was the situation in the United States in 1930s with the growth of industry, corporate mergers in the 20s, got bigger and bigger and bigger until they sought to control the government itself. And now let's take time for a message from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting, and I'm back again to talk to you about one of these little wrinkles that can cause a lot of problems and a lot of happiness for people who actually want to own a business, or who have just started a business, or who have been operating a business now for some time. It doesn't really matter. My guess is that you wanted asset protection. That's one of the reasons for starting a business. You wanted to grow wealth, and you wanted to protect the wealth that you created, and you thought that a limited liability company or a corporation would be the way to do that. But did you know that just creating a corporation or a limited liability company does not guarantee that at all? Do you want to know if there's any way to fix that? Go to www.jakelaw.me, that's JAKELAW.me, and watch my video where I talk about this very important thing, and then set up a time where we can have a phone conference, or call me directly now at 573-454-1168. That's 573-454-1168. Call now. And now let's get back to Politics by Jake. He's talking about some very interesting things here, and you'll want to stay tuned. So without further ado, back to Jake. Now, since we're on this topic, and this is just a very important topic, as I said, I wanted to do a segment on it. There's much grist for the mill, and we will. But I wanted to include, because it's just very important for people to understand these things, because we live in an economy today, we live in a job situation today that's just completely unlike what Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the New Deal wanted. We have the gig economy, where people are out there hustling. They've got their main hustle. They've got their side hustle. They've got their gig. This is not conducive to economic prosperity, and it's been foisted upon you by the Republican Party, the very same party that brought you the MAGAs and Donald Trump. And I'm talking about you, Liz Cheney, and I'm talking about you, Mitt Romney, and I'm talking about all you other Republicans. You are the ones that gave us MAGA, and this is the kind, and Ronald Reagan, St. Ronald, the actor. These are the kinds of things that have been foisted upon this economy, where we find people in the rising generation who don't think that they're going to be able to own a home, that are in debt, saddled with terrible debt because of their education. So, all right, so we need to talk about this, and we may as well get it from the horse's mouth. So listen with me, if you will, to this very important speech given by Franklin Delano Roosevelt on the Second Bill of Rights. Here we go.
They were our rights to life and liberty. We have come to a clearer realization of the fact, however, that true individual freedom cannot exist without economic security and independence. Necessitous men are not free men. People who are hungry, people who are out of a job, are the stuff of which dictatorships are made. In our day, these economic truths have become accepted as self-evident. We have accepted, so to speak, a second Bill of Rights, under which a new basis of security and prosperity can be established for all, regardless of station or race or creed. Among these are the right to a useful and remunerative job in the industry, or shops, or farms, or mines of the nation. The right to earn enough to provide adequate food and clothing and recreation. The right of farmers to raise and sell their products at a return which will give them and their families a decent living. The right of every businessman, large and small, to trade in an atmosphere of freedom from unfair competition and domination by monopolies at home or abroad. The right of every family to a decent home. The right to adequate medical care and the opportunity to achieve and enjoy good health. The right to adequate protection from the economic fears of old age and sickness and accident and unemployment. Finally, the right to a good education. All of these rights spell security. And after this war is won, we must be prepared to move forward in the implementation of these rights to new goals of human happiness and well-being. America's own rightful place in the world depends in large part upon how fully these and similar rights have been carried into practice for all our citizens. For unless there is security here at home, there cannot be lasting peace in the world. One of the great American industrialists of our day, a man who has rendered yeoman service to his country in this crisis, recently emphasized the grave dangers of rightist reaction in this nation. All fair-thinking businessmen share that concern. Indeed, if such reaction should develop, if history were to repeat itself, and we were to return to the so-called normalcy of the 1920s, then it is certain that even though we shall have conquered our enemies on the battlefields abroad, we shall have yielded to the spirit of fascism here at home.
And one of these things is the right to an education. Listen to that, the right to an education. Not the privilege of an education, but the right of everybody to an education, and that includes a higher education. And you may remember from some years ago, Bobby Jindal of the state of Louisiana. He was the governor there at one time, and he was able to do this. And he ruined public education. He ruined the public schools in the state of Louisiana. And that is the model for what the Republican Party is trying to do on a broader scale. And they don't care that it failed. That's their model, and they will keep trying to do this. That's the thing about these MAGAs and these Freedom Caucus types, is that they double down. And they don't care that the education of our youth has been compromised in this way. All they care about is that there's a huge pot of money there, and if they can create charter schools or they can create private schools, they can charge the people for them. And you know, the people who can't afford to pay the tuition, they don't care. Let them go to the wreckage of what is left of the public schools and be educated rather poorly, or maybe not even at all. I could talk at greater length about this. I had an experience with one of my sons this very way, but we won't get into that now. That's for another time. Again, we've talked about this on this show before, and we'll continue to talk about this. It's so simple. It's about money. They want to privatize these things. They want to wreck these things. And the reason they want to do it is because, as I said, huge pot of money there. It's unavoidable. I'm telling you, it's unavoidable. this falls right in line, whether they want to tell you this or not. It falls right in line with the classic definition of fascism. They want private enterprise to control everything, including the organs of government, including the means of production. You can roll your eyes about it, but this is what it is. And we talk about this here on Politics by Jake. It's one of the things anyway. One of the things about higher education, too, which begins to flesh out and make you understand the reason why Johnson was at Columbia, on the steps of Columbia, for crying out loud, calling for the resignation of the administration, because they hate higher education from a philosophical standpoint. Because if you have had even a year or two of college, you are much less likely fall for this kind of nonsensical MAGA demagoguery of this moribund and defunct and despicable Republican Party. You become much broader when you get higher education, much broader in your horizons, much less infected with race hatred and other forms of hatred. And the Republican Party needs this. They need divisiveness. They need division. They need hatred. They need it like they need air to breathe. And all of this is basically summed up in a focal point when you look, like I say, at the visit of Mike Johnson. I was honestly kind of surprised by this, that they pivoted from the Ukraine bill and went to this so quickly. But the visit of Mike Johnson and his coterie of MAGAs to Columbia University, on the steps of Columbia University this past couple of days. And one of the things that you need to understand is that we at Politics by Jake here want you to understand, and that the show is here to explain to you, is that this is the platform of the corrupt, defunct Republican Party. And you have, for example, like I say, Johnson on the steps of Columbia University, which was practically founded by Alexander Hamilton. And you have him calling for the ouster of the president of Columbia University, pontificating about how there are protests if they succeed. It is prima facie proof of what their agenda is. And it's extremely important, as I said, not to think that this is something isolated or that this is something done for any other motive than the ulterior motive, which I have described for you, which is to destroy public education on all its levels. And oh, by the way, you have this, I've got to mention this to you. I hold no brief here at Politics by Jake for the ultra left. We don't like them at all. We think they're as bad as the reactionary right. So you have this scenario where you have this person who I consider to be a hypocrite, this Ilhan Omar, who's a member of the so-called squad of ultra-lefts. She hates the United States. She says there's nothing in it but racism, nothing in it but hatred. She says she can't stand the United States. And look what we see. Her own daughter is ensconced at Columbia. And this reminds me of the Russians. The Russians, they all hate the West. They talk about it, and the word they use is putrid. They talk about the putrid West. Oh, the West is so putrid, and they hold their noses, and it's so awful. But they have their children in all the schools in the West, in the United States and Europe. They keep their money in all the bank accounts of the West. And when they want a vacation, they vacation in the West. And when they want to retire, they want to retire to the West. I mean, this is just, this is rank hypocrisy. And you see it also in these ultras like Omar and others, where they hate the West. And really, if you catch them in unguarded moments and you talk with some of them, you see what their true interest is. This is just rank hypocrisy. They want to knock off the Democrats, and like I say, if you can get them to admit that, and they do, if you catch them in an unguarded moment, you can get them to say that they're just in the Democratic Party. They don't support the Democratic Party. They're just in there to take over from within. And this situation with Omar's daughter is just indicative of this ridiculousness and this hypocrisy. A lot of working kids from the Midwest and other areas, they couldn't get into Columbia. But she got in. Her daughter got in. She obviously had the inside track. So, isn't it great to be an enemy of imperialism, as Omar and other members of the squad describe it, and yet enjoy the fruits of imperialism, once again, as she describes it. But of course, I'm just talking about it from this, it's not true that the United States is imperialist. I'm talking about it from the standpoint of how she likes to portray the United States. And, I wish we could get, and Politics by Jake calls for this, by the way. So listen up. I talk about a lot of things. I talk about what's wrong, but I also talk about solutions. And I wish that we could get the identity groups of the Democratic Party to do the same thing. I wish we could get them to sign an agreement that an attack on one, kind of like NATO, an attack on one is an attack on all. And remember, this is one of Trigby's rules that I talked about a few weeks ago. No matter how much you hate the politics of another identity group and how under ordinary circumstances you would fight the politics of one of these other groups, in this situation, you align with them, you make common cause. And this is extremely important because, once again, who is the enemy? The enemy is fascism. The enemy is Trump. The enemy is MAGA. And I tell you, if we could do this, and all of my listeners out there, if we could do this, victory would absolutely, positively be assured. The only way these forces can do what they do is the old Roman adage, divide et impera, divide and conquer. And if you take that away from them, you have defeated them. And now let's take time for a message from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting, and I'm back. And what I want to talk to you about now is something I call virtual invisibility. No, not literal comic book type invisibility. What I am talking about is a practical invisibility, a kind of invisibility where you cannot be seen, where your personal transactions are shielded, where your business affairs are hidden from prying eyes, where a purchase of certain items is far less likely to be able to be found out by persons who have an intent to do you and your loved ones harm, the kind that results in the preservation and the protection of your personal assets, your business assets, all for your benefit and the benefit of your loved ones, the ones you are doing all this for in the first place. That's virtual invisibility. Crazy, you say? No, this exists. It's a thing. Want to know more? Contact me either at my website, www.jakelaw.me, or call me direct at 573-454-1168. Do it now. Become invisible now. And now let's get back to Politics by Jake. He's talking about some very interesting things here, and you'll want to stay tuned. So without further ado, back to Jake. Okay, now let's take a moment and do some comments. I want to talk about this Mayorkas impeachment. First of all, the impeachment of Joe Biden is gone. That's just the Gohmert and all of the others who are Jim Bag Jordan. They're running for the hills. They don't want to have anything to do with this because it failed. It completely failed. They thought that they could tie up the Congress when the Congress has more things to do, but it just completely failed because they have nothing, and they tried to impeach Alejandro Mayorkas, and he is the United States Secretary of Homeland Security, and they were basically, their general allegation was that he was engaged in willful and systemic refusal, I'm reading here from Wikipedia, to secure the border. And guess what happened on this? Nothing. There was nothing there. So the impeachment in the House has gone nowhere. The Republicans in the House, they're running from it as fast as they can because there's basically nothing there. All they've got, once again, all they've got is their hatred. And in my opinion, they're making a lot of mistakes. And consider this. The Latino vote in the United States is a block. There's no doubt about that. And Mayorkas is a Latino. And say you want to court. It's election year, right? It's 2024. It's an election year. Say you want to court the Latino vote. Does it really make sense to impeach a Latino in an election year? And that's what they've done. They've attempted to impeach Alejandro Mayorkas. how are you supposed to, the Senate just shut it down. They shut it down, no trial, no nothing. They just said they weren't going to do it. And again, the question I have from a strategy standpoint, assuming for the sake of the argument that, you're a Republican, and I don't know how many Republicans are faithful listeners of Politics by Jake. If you are, I welcome you. But for the sake of argument, how do you court the Latino vote in a presidential election year when you're willing to get rid of a Latino secretary in the cabinet like Mayorkas? It doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't make any sense because the only way that you can actually describe it is because they're motivated by this hatred, by this animus, and there's just nothing behind it. Just like after this 6 months of sabotage, which include blocking the military aid to Ukraine, they have finally been broken. And the House voted significantly for the military aid, and of course sent it. And get this, they sent it without killer cuts. They sent it without genocidal austerity in other areas. There is a limited loan component. That's going to be overridden by having a president, that is to say Joe Biden, who has a brain, who's just going to forgive the loan. Because in World War I, for example, we had a lesson in history from this because the United States held a great deal of war debt in Europe, and this made them very unpopular in Europe. And so you want to be judicious with these debts. So in order to make it look like the MAGA caucus got something, they made this as loans, but it's going to be overwritten. So anyway, this is basically the situation you have. That the House has been broken. All of these things are points of inflection, which may indicate, and Politics by Jake wants to see the destruction of the Republican Party. We want them to die the political death, like the Whigs, like the Know-Nothings, like the Federalists, and we want them to not rise again. We realize that they will still be there. There will be some areas of the country in which they will be a regional force, but we want to make them and use everything that we can do. And that's, of course, Politics by Jake, is to talk about what you can do in order to make this happen. We want to see them die the political death and rise no more. Okay, now I want to make some comments about Hamas and the situation in Palestine. And once again, we try to avoid the reporting that the New York Times and the Atlantic and the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post and the Examiner and so on and so forth are doing, because they're doing that. And I know that you're getting that, and I try not to be redundant about that, but I wanted to make some comments. And these are recent historical comments and political comments about the situation. And one of the things that I want to say is that nobody wants the Palestinians. And unfortunately, this has kind of been a historical thing. It's nothing new. It's been going on a long time. They always try to take over. They tried to take over Jordan. If you remember Black September. Black September was in 1970 and 71, and it was between King Hussein of Jordan, his forces, and the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And it was an armed conflict. And it was led by Chairman Yasser Arafat. So they tried to do that, and that failed. Then they went to Lebanon, and they tried to take that over, and that failed. They were kicked out of Lebanon also, and they actually wound up in Tunis. The leadership had to flee from Lebanon, and they wound up in Tunis, which is in North Africa. They actually were holding their meetings, their leadership meetings, in a coffee house in Tunis. True story. But, they're so full of hate that they don't have any positive program. They hate Israel, of course. They would never be satisfied with anything unless their condition that Israel be driven into the sea was met. Tough to negotiate with people who insistently and repeatedly demand the destruction of the person or the state entity that they're negotiating with. That's kind of a killer right there. And you look at that and you think, well, these guys, they've got a conceptual problem. I mean, they can't be sincere. I mean, they can't be serious, but they are. They're just so full of hate. And this shows they don't have any positive program. And their leadership have historically had a problem with excessive posturing, excessive rhetoric, posing. It gets you nowhere. It just makes things worse. And now let's take time for a message from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake, and I'm back again to talk to all of you who are business owners. You want asset protection, right? And why? Because you wanted the wealth that you were growing in the business to be protected in the best way possible, and you wanted to keep your personal wealth out of it. But did you know that just creating a corporation or a limited liability company does not guarantee that at all? If you're like me, that makes you feel pretty angry. Do you want to know if there's any way to protect your business and your personal wealth? Well, go to www.jakelaw.me or call me directly now at 573-454-1168. And let's talk about that. Call now. Save your assets now. And now let's get back to Politics by Jake. He's talking about some very interesting things here, and you'll want to stay tuned. So without further ado, back to Jake. You know, with regard to the situation now, the quickest way to see who's the person of goodwill, because I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but what I'm about to tell you about, Hamas doesn't want this. Hamas is the leadership of the Palestinians. And what I'm about to tell you that's happening, they literally don't want. So who is doing the airdrops right now? Well, it's the United States, it's Jordan, it's Indonesia, it's Germany, it's France, and it's Britain. And I think there are a couple of other countries that are doing it too. Who's building the bridge out into the sea so that the ships can come in and deliver supplies? Initially on the airdrops, they were doing the airdrops, and they had like 14 planes, and they were doing airdrops into northern Gaza. And I stated it before, it was the United States, France, Britain, Germany, Indonesia, Jordan, etc. You get the idea. So you have all of these people. If you go on Twitter X, they're talking about how much they hate the United States, how we're imperialists. Oh, we hate the United States, the Air Force, they're bad. But, you know, when those food drops hit the ground, there's nobody who's not trying to get a handful of meals ready to eat. So once again, and this is what I want to portray here, we want to portray here at Politics by Jake, this is just rank hypocrisy. It's misdirection. It's the venting of Hamas of their spleen, and they're venting it in the wrong direction. It's not Iran or any of the other countries who are helping the Palestinians, because they really don't like the Palestinians for the reasons that I just described, because they always try to take over, as I said, Jordan and Lebanon, and they're so much blinded by hate that they literally don't want the airdrops, they don't want the pier, and they literally say, let people die. And there are a lot of idiots among them who are so blinded so much by this hatred that they literally can't see straight. And they're willing to let their own people die in order to foster this hate, this hysteria of hatred. And it's wrong. And I don't think that I have to go much further in order to describe that. And, for all these people who express solidarity with the Palestinians, it's time to put their money where their mouth is. You know what? You hate this. Send some food. Join with the 9 nations that have been doing this. Join with the 9 nations that are doing the airdrops. Join with the 9 nations that are building the bridge and the pier and the causeway so that they can deliver food and other provisions so that the Palestinians don't starve. And at Politics by Jake, our attitude is that the United States has to take over Gaza as a protectorate because Israel has failed. The United Nations has failed. There is no other nation. Once again, the United States is the indispensable nation, and you're seeing it. I mean, this is the part where you say the old adage that money talks and BS walks. So I encourage those who are expressing solidarity with the Palestinians, put your money where your mouth is. Join with the airdrop. Join with the army ships that are soon coming. Help build the pier. Help build the causeway. Do that. And now let's take time for a message from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting, and I'm back again to talk to you about one of these little wrinkles that can cause a lot of problems and a lot of happiness for people who actually want to own a business, or who have just started a business, or who have been operating a business now for some time. It doesn't really matter. My guess is that you wanted asset protection. That's one of the reasons for starting a business. You wanted to grow wealth, and you wanted to protect the wealth that you created, and you thought that a limited liability company or a corporation would be the way to do that. But did you know that just creating a corporation or a limited liability company does not guarantee that at all? Do you want to know if there's any way to fix that? Go to www.jakelaw.me, that's JAKELAW.me, and watch my video where I talk about this very important thing, and then set up a time where we can have a phone conference, or call me directly now at 573-454-1168. That's 573-454-1168. Call now. And now let's get back to Politics by Jake. He's talking about some very interesting things here, and you'll want to stay tuned. So without further ado, back to Jake. Okay, now we have this interesting thing going on where A.G. Sussberg of the who's the owner of the controlling interest anyway of the New York Times, amazingly basically admitted that they have a grudge against Joe Biden. And, you know, why is this? It's the same thing I answer. It's the same thing with all the money, power, Wall Street, the oligarchs, the billionaires. It's simple. It's simple. It's economics. Like James Carville said, it's the economy, stupid, and their own personal economies, because they don't want to pay a 25% billionaire tax, which Joe Biden would enforce upon them. They don't want to pay a 28% corporate income tax. Some of the things, and these are things that would, you know, lift many Americans out of poverty, you know, quite frankly. They don't want to do that. They want to fight that. This would, I mean, they'd rather buy radio stations. They'd rather other media outlets and put on moles and shills who would peddle the line about Biden, how corrupt he is, crime family, how old he is, etc. Any way that they can think of that he's unfit to be president. Let me tell you, Politics by Jake has this point of view. If Biden had not won the 2020 election, the country might already be lost. Or in the alternative, we might be ready. We might already be in that civil war, which seems so many on the right long for and talk so fondly and urgently about. And do you know, actually, speaking of taxes, do you know what the top corporate rate was under Eisenhower in the 50s? It was 90%. And you know, as I recall, these corporations got along just fine with that. Thank you very much. We want to be done, and this is the heritage of the Republicans. We want to be done with Republicans. We want to be away with them. Out damned Spot, out damned Republican. We want to see them no more. Some of their front people, like Moscow Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's a disgrace. Now, I will say Moscow Mitch McConnell did pretty good this past week, rallying votes for the Ukraine package. But he's really the architect of all these bad decisions, these unjustifiable decisions of this facile, nonsensical Supreme Court. He's the architect of it, and he's the architect of it because of his extrajudicial manipulations in order to get people on the Supreme Court who, you know, really shouldn't be on, and to give short shrift in the nomination hearings in order to get them on. Now, let's see what else to talk about. You know, it's very much noteworthy that MAGA Mike Johnson reversed his field and allowed the aid packages to come to a vote. And they basically passed on, I mean, I don't want to say supermajorities. They did pass. They passed significantly. There were, but interestingly, there were 100 Republicans who voted for these packages, and there were 112 Republicans who voted against. Virtually all the Democrats voted for. But he reversed his field on this sabotage that he was sponsoring because of the MAGA caucus, which, you know, threatens him. Anyway, it was overwhelming. It was not just a simple majority. people wanted this. He said, let the people speak. The people spoke in the House and in the Senate, and these packages passed just like this. And, in the meantime, Biden found ways to work around it can't be called anything except treasonous sabotage, and I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. But by that, members of the House and by the members of the Senate, but mostly the House, because, of course, appropriation bills, they originate in the House. That's of necessity. That's just the way these things go. You can't have an appropriations bill come out of the Senate. It can be passed to the Senate for passage, but it must originate in the House. But Biden found ways to work around this delay, and aid began to flow within hours of the signing of the bill. The attempts of Moscow March to strangle that aid bill have failed. The subordination and filth of this is disgusting. This is an embarrassment. She shows herself nothing so much as that she wants to be a toady and a lackey of Putin, to take her marching orders and talking points from the Kremlin. Now, we can only hope in the November elections that we will be rid of her and be liberated from all her nonsensical and offensive mechanizations and depredations and all of her nonsense. By the way, as you may know, Sherman's March to the Sea, this was the Civil War. Rome, Georgia, which is her constituency, that's who elected her, they were directly in the path of Sherman's March to the Sea. And as a result of that, Rome, Georgia was liberated from the Confederate disease and scourge. But the important thing to remember, that this is one of the important reasons for Politics by Jake, by the way, shameless plug, is that they're still down there. The Confederacy is still down there. It has not died. Lincoln freed the slaves. He was exceedingly merciful to the South, And what do we have as a consequence of it but the persistence and the perpetuation of historical heresies about what happened, such as the infamous Lost Cause, the attempt to what has also infamously, I would say, be called Jim Crow laws, which was a de facto slavery against African Americans that kept them legally bound for another 100 years until the Civil Rights Act was passed by Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1965. So we can only hope that in the November elections, the South will once more be liberated from the likes and the ilk of Moscow March. And again, let's hear it for President Joe Biden, who was able to scrape together, while all of this nonsense was going on in the House, was able to scrape together another $300 million during this interim period, and they were able to send 100 ATACMS missiles. Those are the long-range ones. They have a 300-kilometer range, and that's 180 miles. And I say, let's use those to shoot up that odious bridge on the Straits of Kerch, the Kerch Bridge. It's the bridge that connects Russia with Crimea. If it was destroyed, this would create a huge logistical problem for the proposed spring offensive that Russia wants to enact just in a week or so here. I also think, although I'm not sure that the use of these ATACMS missiles would be able to hit some of the roads, the land bridge, if you will, that the Russians are using to supply their troops, they can do that. The Kerch Bridge spans from the easternmost promontory of Crimea to the Russian landmass. It's a long bridge. It's something like 15 miles long. So we want to do that, and not only that, but we want to call upon Chancellor Scholz of Germany, get him to send some more of those famous Taurus cruise missiles. And these have worked really well. The British and the French, they have these too. They have cruise missiles also, but frankly, the German ones are better. In other words, what we want to do is a kind of a gift as far as the $61 billion going to Ukraine is concerned, is we'd like to see an attack on the Kerch Bridge, which, of course, the Straits of Kerch lead to the Black Sea on the south, and on the north up to the Sea of Azov. And we think it's time for the Crimeans to be freed of all that loud military traffic, not only by the automobiles and the trucks, but by rail. A lot of railway traffic goes over that bridge as well. I'll tell you, Once you take out the Kerch Bridge, the whole complexion of the war changes. It's no longer the Russians advancing. What it becomes is the Russian military suffering from acute loss and dearth of supply. Dearth means lack. Acute loss and lack of supply. Remember the old saying that when you're talking about war, amateurs talk about what? They talk about strategy. They talk about tactics. But what do professionals do? Professionals talk about logistics. So this is Politics by Jake, of course. I'm Jake. I'm your host and commentarist. And what this show wants is we want a united front against Trump. We want a united front against MAGA. We want a united front against fascism. MAGA, by the way, Make America Great Again, is simply a rehash of the Lindberghian 1930s America First campaign. That's one of the reasons why history is so important. If we don't understand history, if someone doesn't talk about it, because these things recycle. They cycle and they recycle again, and they come around again. Fascism was big in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and now it has come around again. Same thing with America First. And that's the purpose of this show. It's an enduring polemic and platform of this show. We're against Trump. We're against MAGA. We're against America First. Not because we don't believe in America First, but because we believe it's a phony, baloney grift and con. And that it doesn't seek to make America first. It seeks to weaken America. And it seeks to appease its enemies. And, of course, we're, also against fascism. And in line with this, let me just point out one of the things about the willingness of the MAGA Quisling caucus of the Republicans. And this includes Marjorie Taylor Greene. It includes Laura Boebert. This includes Louis Gohmert. And there's a lot of them. There's 112 of them that voted against the package for Ukraine in the House. Their willingness to cut off aid to Ukraine in wartime against the Russians this is kind of a national suicide on the installment plan, as it were. And since they're, I'm talking about this national suicide, I'll tell you what I think it is. It's national suicide to allow Putin to conquer Ukraine. Because if you do, before you know it, the Russians will then be at the gates of Poland, and that's NATO. United States military groups are there. Or if they decide to go north, you have the Baltic states, you have Latvia, you have Lithuania, you have Estonia. That is the Russians, they may decide that that's the theater that they want to go to. And once again, you have NATO there. The United States military has troops there. Or if you go against Romania, that's to the south, that would also be NATO. United States groups are there also. And, Mitt Romney, who is one of these persons who's like Liz Cheney, the media likes, and they like to portray them as good conservatives. And I say, what? Good conservatives? Give me a break. It's these people, the Mitt Romneys of the world and the Liz Cheneys of the world, who gave us the maggots to the extent that they were already there, which they were. I mean, this is a story of long standing, and it deserves to be told. I'm not going to tell it now, but I will. It goes back to the antebellum South. It goes back to the planter class. It goes back to a whole bunch of other things like the Scottish Rite of Masonry in particular, and other secret combinations of that type. But one thing I will go along with them on that, which is that they say, actually, Romney fairly crows about this. It excites him so much that he loves to talk about it. And this is what he says. He says, look what we're getting for our money in Ukraine. They're fighting for us, and not one American boot is on the ground. Not one. And that's right. He's right. They are fighting for us, in that they are fighting basically for the free world. That rules-based world that Putin and Russia hate so much, because the Russians only respect power. And it remains Putin's desire to go not only back to the days of the so-called satellites that surrounded Russia to give it this nonsensical buffer zone that the Russians used to justify taking away the nuclear weapons of a free state as a trade for not violating their national sovereignty. as the Budapest Memorandum of 1993 says, which they did anyway, and of which Ukraine is a perfect example of this. You need to understand Putin is an oligarch. Putin is a criminal. Putin is KGB. Putin is a liar. So to not aid Ukraine, this is a piece of insanity. Because what Putin actually wants is what Peter the Great wanted. It's what all the Russians want, because Russia believes, as a part of its religious doctrine, actually, this is really true. This is a part of its religious doctrine, that it is the third Rome. They hate the West. They call it the putrid West, which is, really kind of funny, because they hate the West. I mean, it's just like Hamas. I don't want to get distracted and talk about Hamas, but Hamas is the same way. They're full of hate. The Russians, they hate the West, putrid West. They think that Moscow is the third Rome. And once again, this is going to be disconnected. You don't understand context, because I'm not giving you the context. We'll have to do that in another show. But they think that it's the third Rome. But what they want to do is, and this is because Putin is a revanchist, which means he wants revenge. He wants the lands back. He wants the old Soviet power back. He's a Stalinist, and Stalinist was a revolutionary. Lenin was a revolutionary, and they weren't content to have their revolution just in Russia. They wanted to export it, and they want to export it everywhere. So what they really want to do is not just go to Ukraine. They want to go to Paris, and then they want to go to Dunkirk. They want to go all the way to the English Channel. So this is the important thing. Don't be fooled by these MAGAs, these political and cultural populist religious chuckleheads who spout the Russian line. That is your piece of insanity right there. Don't be fooled by any of that MAGA, Western media mole, Russian disinformatia line nonsense. That's insanity. Don't be fooled. And now let's take a break. And now let's take time for a message from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting, and I'm back. And what I want to talk to you about now is something I call virtual invisibility. No, not literal comic book type invisibility. What I am talking about is a practical invisibility, a kind of invisibility where you cannot be seen, where your personal transactions are shielded, where your business affairs are hidden from prying eyes, where a purchase of certain items is far less likely to be able to be found out by persons who have an intent to do you and your loved ones harm, the kind that results in the preservation and the protection of your personal assets, your business assets, all for your benefit and the benefit of your loved ones, the ones you are doing all this for in the first place. That's virtual invisibility. Crazy, you say? No, this exists. It's a thing. Want to know more? Contact me either at my website, www.jakelaw.me, or call me direct at 573-454-1168. Do it now. Become invisible now. Okay, so basically we're at the end of the show now, but we have some things going on. Trump is at it again. I mean, this is right up to the minute stuff. He has apparently attacked witness Cassidy Hutchinson and has actually confirmed what it was that she was saying. This is from the Open Mouth and Insert Foot Department, that he actually did try to get agents to take him to the Capitol on January 6th, and he's basically lied about it, just like he basically lies about everything else. And then we have Marjorie Taylor Greene, of course, on her ultra-reactionary quest to take the United States back to before the Civil War, back to before Sherman's March to the Sea, which actually led through her constituency in Rome, Georgia. And they're going to try to vacate the chair and get rid of the Speaker, Mike Johnson, MAGA Mike. And fortunately, Hakeem Jeffries, I don't know if it's fortunate or unfortunate, he said that he would instruct the Democrats to vote as a bloc to retain Johnson in the chair. Probably a smart move. And finally, we have Kristi Noem, the governor of South Carolina. She shot her dog. Now she's trying to backtrack. Apparently, there's some kind of misbegotten perception on Noem's part that it would be okay for her to talk about shooting her dog. And there's a lot of other things going on, but that'll have to wait for the next edition of Politics by Jake. PB&J, no, not peanut butter and jelly. No, wait, stop. Let me explain this. It's not, no,